The sun had just begun its descent, casting long amber fingers across the quiet streets of Saluter Avenue. The trees whispered overhead, their branches arching above the road like a cathedral of old oaks and wealth. Porches stood wide and proud, with wind chimes dancing softly in the fading light. Officer Travis Brenner rolled slowly through the lane, one hand on the wheel, the other gripping a half-empty thermos of stale coffee. His shift had 2 hours left. Routine, predictable, the kind of evening where nothing happened, until it did. The Mercedes glided to a stop at the intersection ahead. Black, shiny, too smooth. It idled, then eased through the stop sign, not abruptly, but with a hesitation that didn't sit right with him. He squinted. No plate, or at least none he could see from this angle. That was enough. He flicked on his lights, the red and blue splashing across brick mailboxes and manicured hedges. Unit 24, he said into the radio. Initiating traffic stop. Black Mercedes S-Class. No visible plate. Solo occupant. The car slowed, then turned, then stopped beneath a blossoming dogwood tree. Travis stepped out, shoes crunching softly against gravel. As he approached, the window began to lower. "Evening, officer," came the voice. A woman. Calm. Clear. Not afraid. Inside sat a black woman, late 60s, maybe. Silver hair cropped short, eyes level and unshaken. She wore a black robe. Judicial. Not religious. "I'm Judge Renee Mallory," she said. "I'm returning home from the courthouse." Travis hesitated. "License and registration, please." Her movements were measured, deliberate. No fumbling. No questions. The documents came forward like she'd done it 100 times. "Is there a reason for the stop?" she asked. He glanced at the documents. They matched. No red flags. No alerts. But his pride itched. There was a stolen vehicle matching this description reported earlier. Just taking precautions. Renee arched an eyebrow. "It's registered in my name. You can confirm that." He walked back to his cruiser. Radio dispatch. Watched her through the rearview mirror. Still. Composed. Watching the sky more than the flashing lights. The voice came back through the speaker. "No stolen report. Vehicle registered to a Renee Mallory. All clear." Still, Travis didn't return her documents. He approached the car again, slower this time. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." A pause. Then, "Is that a lawful order?" His hand dropped just slightly near his holster. "Yes." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you detaining me?" "I'm asking you to step out. That's all." A crowd began to bloom across the street, quiet observers with curious eyes. One lifted a phone. Red light blinking. Renee's voice rose, not in volume, but in clarity. "I am Judge Renee Mallory of the 5th Judicial Circuit. You have verified this vehicle as mine. You are detaining me without cause." Something in Travis stiffened. The crowd leaned in. A teen shouted, "That's Judge Mallory. She gave my cousin probation last year. She don't lie." Another voice, "Yo, she's still in her robe." Travis shifted his weight, scanning the growing cluster of phones, whispering mouths, arms crossed in disbelief. He stepped back. Just enough, but not far enough. He returned to his car, fingers tapping the steering wheel, dispatch words ringing in his head. Everything checked out. Still he didn't leave. He got out again. Shut the door harder this time, pacing back to her window like something needed to be finished. The window lowered 2 inches more. "What else do you need, Officer Brenner?" she asked. Her voice was cool. Courtroom cool. Like cross-examining someone who already told a lie. "How long have you owned the vehicle?" "Since February. Certified pre-owned. Paid in full." Travis nodded like he was scribbling invisible notes. "You asking how I paid for it?" He blinked. "No, because that's what it sounds like." Her voice cut through the tension like a gavel. "Ma'am, I'm not trying to. You verified my license, registration, and identity. And yet, you're still here. Why?" More phones went up. Whispers now had words. "She's schooling him," someone said. "He's shaking. Look at his hands." Across the street, someone shouted, "You ain't ready for her, officer." He felt it now. his authority thinning, his confidence unraveling. Then headlights lit up the scene. A second cruiser. Officer Marcy Keller stepped out, mid-30s, sharp build, no nonsense. She walked toward Travis, voice low. "That's Judge Mallory." "I know," he muttered. "Then what are you doing?" "I thought it matched." "Thought? That's not policy." She glanced at the crowd. "This is already out of your hands. Let her go." But Travis didn't move, and neither did the judge. Her robe still rested against the seat. But the silence, that was rising like a storm. Marcy Keller didn't need a full briefing to read the room. She saw the phones first, the shimmer of recording lights, the shoulders, tensed just a bit too tight. Then she saw the robe. Judge Renee Mallory. Her presence felt like stone. Not heavy, but immovable. Even seated, she commanded the street. Marcy had testified in her courtroom once. Knew she didn't play politics or posture. She dealt in facts. In order. In silence that said more than most men shouting. And tonight, that silence was building like thunder. "Travis," Marcy said again, stepping between him and the car. He blinked like someone waking from a daze. "You got dispatch confirmation. She's not a suspect. She's not a risk. You're done." He didn't answer. And that, she realized, was the problem. He didn't know how to. Behind him, a woman in a head wrap whispered into her phone. "He's still holding her. They confirm she's clean. This is wild." Renee's fingers tapped once on the steering wheel. Her window lowered another inch. "Officer Keller," she said, her tone unshaken. "Do you intend to de-escalate this or watch it unravel?" Marcy turned slowly to Travis. "You're not winning this. And this isn't a game. Let her go." But Travis stepped forward. Again. His voice was tight, fragile. "Ma'am, I'm asking you to step out for further questioning." Renee's eyes narrowed. "And I am asking if I am being detained." Silence. Someone across the street yelled, "This is harassment." Marcy's hand hovered slightly, half between her belt and restraint. Travis wasn't pulling his weapon, but he was pulling something else. Power. And the robe still sat there. Black. Unapologetic. Renee opened the door herself. Stepped out. The crowd murmured. She didn't move quickly or dramatically. She rose like someone used to commanding rooms. "I'm standing here, Officer Brenner," she said. "What now?" Her arms were at her sides, palms empty, head high. Travis stared. Then something broke. Not outside, inside. The kind of break where ego cracks just enough to let doubt leak in. He stepped back. Just a foot. But a foot too late. Renee turned slightly to the crowd. "I will be filing a formal complaint with the department. I will request full release of body and dashcam footage. If you're recording, I suggest you keep your files backed up." Cheers rose. Not loud, not wild. Just enough to remind everyone who still had control. Marcy stepped beside her. "You're good to go, Judge. I'll handle this." Renee didn't smile. Just nodded. She got back in the car. The engine purred to life. She pulled away slowly, deliberately, and the weight of everything she didn't say filled the street behind her. Travis stood still, heart thudding beneath the Kevlar. He didn't look up as the crowd thinned, didn't meet Marcy's gaze, and didn't hear the words she whispered as she walked back to her cruiser. "God help you when this goes public." By sunrise, the clip had been reposted over 200,000 times. Judge. Hub. Calm. Officer. Holster. Hesitation. The headlines weren't just coming, they were multiplying. Some asked questions. Did this South Carolina judge face racial profiling? Others didn't bother. Cop detained sitting judge without cause. Inside Columbia's precinct, the usual 7:15 buzz had vanished. No jokes. No chatter. No clatter of vending machine snacks. Just silence. And the click of Chief Harold Epps' office door unlocking. Officer Travis Brenner sat 3 chairs from the back in the briefing room, his posture stiff, uniform collar suddenly too tight. Marcy stood beside the window, arms folded, lips pressed tight. Chief Epps walked in with a manila envelope and the kind of expression that says, "I didn't sleep." He placed the envelope on the table. "This," he said without ceremony, "is a body cam audit report. Pulled at 2:14 this morning. Footage from last night's incident. Anyone want to guess what's missing? No one spoke. The audio. Epps answered himself. Roughly 47 seconds of it. Gone. He looked directly at Travis. We checked your unit settings. Found a manual mute trigger. Activated exactly when the confrontation escalated. Travis's mouth opened. Closed. That wasn't intentional, sir. I may have hit it by accident. Epps stared at him. Hard. You're trained better than that. Marcy shifted slightly. Not smug. Just tired. Epps slapped the table. You pulled over a woman who teaches the damn law for a living. You ignored dispatch. You escalated without cause. And now your mic went quiet the moment the city started listening. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was indictment. I want a statement. Epps continued. Full report. By noon. Internal Affairs is coming in. You're on paid leave until further notice. Travis stood, stiff as iron. Yes, sir. Outside, the press had already gathered. And inside the courthouse, Judge Mallory's nameplate gleamed beneath the morning sun. But she wasn't in her chambers. She was in a modest kitchen on the city's north side, her mother's house, nursing a mug of black coffee and rereading messages from colleagues and strangers alike. One from a law student. Thank you for standing tall. One from a retired officer. You should have never had to. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She answered, voice calm. Judge Mallory. The voice on the line was soft. Measured. Ma'am, this is Carlos Vega from State Legal Affairs. I was asked to review the body cam logs independently. She said nothing. He continued. I believe someone tried to suppress part of the footage. We're working to retrieve the raw file. There may be more than silence in that gap. She leaned back. You're saying the audio was edited? There's a sequence that suggests the mute trigger was double-tapped. That usually doesn't happen by accident. And the dash cam picked up part of what was said anyway. She looked out the window, her face unreadable. Let me know when you're sure. Carlos hesitated, then added, You should also know. Someone leaked the footage. Her grip tightened slightly on the mug. It's already in hands we can't track. At 11:37 a.m., an anonymous YouTube account uploaded a file titled, Unmuted, Judge Mallory and the 47 seconds they tried to hide. Within the first hour, it had 88,000 views. The audio was raw, Stutitsky, but clear enough. Travis's voice. You sure this ain't your husband's car? Then a pause. Renee's reply. I don't need a man to buy what I've earned. Another voice. You one of them bougie types, huh? Then Marcy's voice. Sharper. Urgent. Travis, enough. The public heard it. All of it. And the city stopped pretending this was procedural. They called the press conference for 4 p.m. sharp. No podium. No fanfare. Just a long wooden table for microphones and a wall of tension so thick even the air conditioning seemed reluctant to cut through it. The Columbia Municipal Hall hadn't seen this kind of turnout since the hurricane vote 2 years prior. But this wasn't weather. This was a reckoning. Judge Renee Mallory stepped into the room dressed not in her robe, but in a navy blue blazer over a soft gray blouse. No jewelry, no podium, no prepared notes. Just her presence. The room quieted the moment she appeared. A murmur passed through the crowd of reporters and local leaders. A city councilman shifted in his seat. A sheriff from the neighboring county stood against the back wall, arms crossed but respectful. Renee approached the mic and paused. Her eyes didn't scan the room. They locked in, centered on the lens straight ahead. I didn't intend to speak publicly, she said, but I've come to understand that silence has its own weight, and I refuse to let it settle in the wrong direction. She paused. The only sound was the whir of camera shutters. Last week, I was pulled over while driving home from the courthouse. The stop began as a question of protocol. It ended as a mirror, held up to the system I serve. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. I was asked subtly then explicitly if the car I was driving was mine. Despite providing credentials, legal identification, and verified registration, the officer persisted. Not because he lacked information, but because he lacked something else, something more dangerous. She let the words breathe. Imagination. Whispers stirred like wind in dry leaves. The imagination to believe that someone like me could rightfully belong in that vehicle, could rightfully wear this title, could rightfully exist without explanation. A reporter near the front lowered his pen. "This isn't just about me," she continued. "This is about what happens when power feels threatened by visibility, when authority is exercised not to protect, but to punish audacity." From the hallway, someone exhaled sharply. "I have spent my entire career upholding laws I did not write, interpreting statutes I did not create, but I have done so with integrity, and that integrity was met with suspicion, not because of my actions, but because of my presence." Another pause. She scanned the reporters now. To the young woman watching this, wondering if she has to shrink herself to stay safe, my answer is no. You do not make yourself smaller to accommodate someone else's fear. You walk forward. You speak, even when your voice trembles. Applause began in the back, small, hesitant, but then it rolled forward like a tide. Renee nodded once and stepped back. That was all she had planned to say. But the story had already slipped beyond anyone's control. Across town, Travis sat in a private HR meeting. The body cam footage paused on a frozen frame, his hand hovering near his weapon. The quote, "You one of them bougie types, huh?" echoed faintly from a speaker before it clicked off. The HR director didn't speak at first. She just looked at him, as if searching for something underneath his badge. "What were you trying to do, Officer Brenner?" He swallowed. "Follow protocol." "You know that's not true." He didn't answer. She clicked a pen, then set it down. "You're being transferred to administrative review. You'll be allowed to respond to the oversight board next week. I suggest you spend that time figuring out not just what happened, but why." Travis nodded slowly, his throat dry. He wasn't fired, but something in him had already been stripped. Meanwhile, the city of Columbia moved differently that week. Police cruisers approached intersections a little slower. Judges walked through courthouse doors to nods that lasted an extra beat. And in a high school English class in North Columbia, a teacher paused mid-lecture, turned on a projector, and played the footage. She didn't talk about racism or class or judicial overreach. She just asked her students, "What do you see here?" A girl in the back raised her hand. Someone doing everything right, and still being questioned. A boy beside her whispered, "That's the part that got me." Their teacher nodded. "Good. Now ask yourselves, what would you do if it was you?" And silence answered back. It was standing room only inside the hearing chamber. Not a courtroom. This wasn't a trial, but it may as well have been. A single long table stretched across the front of the municipal hall, flanked by 5 members of the Police Oversight Review Board. In front of them, a solitary chair. No bench, no gavel, just a microphone and an empty seat. Travis Brenner stepped through the side entrance. Civilian clothes. No badge, no belt. His button-down shirt was freshly pressed, but the sweat at his collar betrayed him. The room didn't boo, but it didn't welcome him either. Judge Mallory wasn't present, not physically, but her name was everywhere. In the packets on the board's desks, on the screens of every local reporter's laptop, on the signs silently held by 3 young law students seated in the back. Travis sat down. The chair creaked under him. The microphone buzzed as it adjusted to his level. He cleared his throat, unsure if it would come out steady. "Officer Brenner," said Chairwoman Vera Lindell, "you're here to respond to the board's findings and provide any clarification you believe necessary. This is not a criminal proceeding, but you are under oath. You may begin." He blinked. The lights above him felt too white, too sterile. He gripped the edge of the table. "I made a call I believed was based on suspicion. I had a report earlier about a vehicle matching the description, and I—" Vera raised a hand. "We've reviewed the footage, officer. Dispatch confirmed the vehicle was not stolen. Yet you continued questioning the driver. You asked how she paid for her car. You muted your body cam." He opened his mouth, closed it. "I was wrong," he said finally. "I was working from instinct, not fact. And I see that now." "You see it because you're here," said another board member. "Would you have seen it if it hadn't gone viral?" Travis's silence was answer enough. Outside, people gathered along the sidewalk. No chants, just presence. A protest not of noise, but of eyes. Watching, judging the system that claimed to police itself. Inside, Travis looked down, then up. I didn't see her, he admitted. I saw a robe. I saw confidence. I saw something I wasn't used to seeing on someone like her, in a neighborhood like that, in a car like that. I thought I was being vigilant, but I was being biased. One of the board members nodded slowly. And now I know the law isn't just what's written down. It's how we carry it. I failed her, and I failed the badge. They let the silence hang. Then Chairwoman Lindell leaned forward. We'll reconvene in 1 week for our decision. Until then, Officer Brenner, you remain under administrative review. He nodded, not because it was what he wanted, but because it was what he deserved. As he left the room, he didn't look at the cameras. He looked at the floor, and the absence of a gavel felt louder than any verdict. The decision came 1 week later, early on a cloudy Thursday morning. Rain threatened but never came, as if even the sky was holding its breath. At 9 a.m., the Oversight Review Board released a statement to the press. The language was careful, almost surgical. Officer Travis Brenner will be formally suspended without pay for 120 days, with mandatory completion of anti-bias training, public apology, and reassignment pending psychological evaluation and retraining. Further infractions will result in termination. But it was the second part of the statement that carried weight. The board acknowledges Judge Renee Mallory as a victim of racial profiling and systemic failure in officer discretion, and commends her restraint and courage in the face of unlawful and unethical behavior. A formal apology would be delivered in person, and it was. That afternoon, in a low-ceiling conference room inside the Columbia Municipal Courthouse, Travis Brenner stood across from Judge Mallory. No uniforms, no robes, just people, uneven but human. I owe you more than words, he began, but I'll start with them. She said nothing. I was wrong. I didn't treat you with respect. I didn't see the truth that was right in front of me. I can't undo what I did, but I can carry it and learn from it. Renee nodded once, slowly, her arms crossed, not defensively, but decisively. What you did wasn't just wrong, she said softly. It was familiar. That's what makes it so painful. It's not new. It's what we all carry. He blinked, eyes reddening. I didn't grow up this way. I didn't think I could be part of this problem. You didn't grow up seeing it. That's different. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then she added, this isn't about destroying you. It's about making sure someone like me never has to prove her existence again. And somehow, that stung more than any punishment. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd waited. Not protesting, just watching. Students, retired teachers, lawyers, clerks. All of them had seen the footage, and all of them were waiting to see what justice looked like when the robe came off. Renee exited first. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. But she held her head high, and the crowd parted, not out of fear, but out of reverence. That night, local news aired a segment simply titled, The Reckoning and the Restoration. Footage played of Renee delivering her now viral statement, side by side with the dashcam clip, her calm against his chaos. But what left the deepest mark wasn't footage. It was a soundbite, brief, quiet, from an interview she gave that morning. The robe means nothing if my name doesn't mean something. The next day, a mural appeared downtown. It wasn't flashy, just her name. Bold, simple, Renee Mallory. Below it, a quote in small paint. Calm isn't silence, it's resistance. It began with a single question during a state bar panel 2 weeks later. Has Judge Mallory returned to her full docket? The moderator hesitated, then nodded. She has, and she's made one adjustment every Friday. She reserves one slot for civics education with local schools. It wasn't just a gesture. It was a reckoning. High school students now sat in her gallery once a week, watching arraignments, listening to legal procedures, asking quiet but powerful questions. And in the community, something shifted. Not overnight, not in headlines, but in spaces smaller and slower, the kind that stick. A coffee shop near Gervais Street posted a sign. Bias can't be brewed out, but can be checked at the door. A Precinct 2 neighborhoods overstarted weekly reflection briefings. Officers watched footage from unrelated cities. They discussed judgment. They rewound the moment a tone changed, a posture stiffened, a choice was made. And Travis Brenner? He didn't return to the same patrol route. He was reassigned to community liaison work, mandatory. Reluctant. Until it wasn't. One evening, he spoke at a forum inside a gymnasium that once held basketball tournaments and now held broken trust. He stood alone under a flickering light. "I'm not here to defend what I did," he said. "I'm here because what I did came from what I hadn't questioned in myself." Some people nodded. Some turned away. But he kept speaking. I didn't see Judge Mallory. I saw a fear I'd never named. And that fear put my hand near my weapon. He exhaled. No one should have to wear a robe to be treated with dignity. And no one wearing a badge should forget that. Someone clapped. Then two more. And though it wasn't redemption, it was resonance. Back at the courthouse, Renee sat alone in her chambers after hours. She didn't replay the footage. She didn't read the comments. She reread a letter from a 12th grader who attended her Friday civics class. "You made the law look like something I could stand inside, not just stand in front of." That line stayed with her. Long after the lights dimmed, long after the uniform faded, long after the badge was no longer the loudest thing in the room. The mural downtown had been up for 3 days before someone left flowers beneath it. No note, just a bundle of white tulips tied with courtroom ribbon, black, trimmed in blue. That image made it onto the front page of the Columbia Ledger. The headline read, "From Reflection to Rebuild, Judge Mallory's Impact Deepens." But it wasn't about the flowers. It was about what came next. At Southridge Middle School, a 7th grade civics class held its first mock trial with students playing judge, jury, and defense. The teacher didn't assign roles. She let them choose. 3 girls raised their hands for judge. One wore a makeshift robe made from her older brother's graduation gown. Across town, a new training module was piloted in the Columbia Police Department. It used body cam footage, raw, unedited. But the twist? Officers watched with community members beside them. They paused. They asked, "What do you see here?" It changed the tone. Slowly. And at Benedict College, a Black Student Leadership Council created a new campaign. Visibility is protection. Their launch video opened with Renee's voice. "You don't wear the robe to be seen. You wear it so others don't disappear." By the end of the month, similar stories began surfacing. A woman in Tulsa who refused to move seats when bumped from business class. A teenager in Chicago recording a stop that shouldn't have happened. A father in Jacksonville citing Mallory's case as reason to challenge a wrongful citation. And through it all, Renee stayed quiet, not absent, just present where it counted. Friday afternoons in her courtroom. Saturday mornings at a downtown cafe. Quiet chats with students. Sharp nods to passing officers who didn't look away anymore. One afternoon, she received an email. Subject, "You probably don't remember me." It was from a young man who once appeared before her for sentencing. "I was 19. I lied to you. You saw through it. But you didn't humiliate me. You gave me 90 days and a book list. I read every one. I graduate in May." She reread the message twice, then leaned back in her chair. The robe had always been a shield, a signal. But now it felt like something more. Not a mirror of authority, a window of possibility. It came quietly, buried in the Monday docket under Municipal Review, Delinquency Appeal, Case hashtag 22-407B. But the courtroom filled faster than anyone expected. The defendant was 15, small-framed, nervous, charged with resisting arrest and obstruction after a scuffle outside a corner store. The arresting officer? One of Travis Brenner's former precinct partners. The footage showed the boy being pushed to the ground after asking why he was being stopped. Renee Mallory watched the tape with eyes that didn't blink. Her bench was the same, her posture unchanged. But the pause between her breaths carried weight. She listened as the defense attorney, a young black woman named Shayla Morris, stood and laid out the case. A teen walked home from basketball practice, was stopped, asked a question, didn't run, didn't shout, but still ended up bruised. Shayla's final line stuck. If asking why gets you cuffed, then the law isn't just broken, it's armed. Renee took it in. The prosecutor's rebuttal was tight, clinical. He made a scene, delayed lawful process. But the air in the room shifted. This wasn't about one night. It was about a thread running through every moment since her own. Renee leaned forward. Was he read his rights? No, Your Honor. Was there probable cause to stop him? Unconfirmed. She tapped the bench once, then looked directly at the officer. Did he pose a threat? The officer hesitated. No. A pause longer than the room expected. She turned back to the young man. You have a right to ask why. He nodded, eyes glassy. I am dismissing the charges, expunging the record, and ordering this department to undergo a formal audit of use of force training and juvenile engagement protocols. Gasps echoed in the gallery. Then silence. Then applause, from parents, from lawyers, from kids in the back row who hadn't clapped in a courtroom before. Renee stood, not for applause, but to look that boy in the eyes. This isn't just about you. This is about a system that's learning, finally, that our children aren't threats. They're mirrors, and we can't afford to keep cracking them. The courtroom stood with her. Outside, the news traveled fast. By nightfall, the hashtag redraw the line was trending. And from classrooms to precincts, a new question took hold. What if every bench carried memory, not just law? For the first time in 30 years, Renee Mallory stood at the edge of her own retirement paperwork. It wasn't resignation. It was reflection. The form sat unopened in her desk drawer, not as an end, but a question. Could she step away now, knowing the bench had just begun to shift beneath the weight of real change? In the weeks since the hashtag redraw the line case, for neighboring counties had initiated their own internal audits. 2 new bills were being drafted in the State House, one for expanded civilian oversight, the other for requiring implicit bias training in law schools. And yet the echoes of that traffic stop still lived in her ribs. Not pain, not pride, just memory. Memory that moved. She sat in chambers one late Thursday evening, watching the light crawl across the wall as the sun set beyond the courthouse dome. A knock at her door broke the silence. Come in, she said. It was Shayla Morris, the young attorney from the recent juvenile case. She held a small leather folder. Her hands shook just enough to be honest. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to say thank you and ask something. Renee set down her pen. Ask. Shayla stepped forward. What kept you from walking away when you had every reason to? Renee looked up. Her voice was quiet. I couldn't, because the future wasn't ready yet, and maybe it needed someone to hold the door open just a little longer. The younger woman nodded slowly. Then I hope to be someone who keeps it open after you. Renee smiled, not broadly, just enough. You already are. That night, she didn't sign the paperwork. She filed it, unopened, because the future she was forced to imagine, one of benches that remembered, robes that didn't silence truth, and justice that didn't need a headline, was no longer a dream. It was a precedent, and someone had to make sure it stuck.